nights, setting your webinar.
Now we cut off. I think it's fixing now though. Oh, you couldn't. Why didn't you tell me?
I just saw it on my
It just kicked out?
but then I heard you.
I'm gonna check right now and see if it's there. Let's see.
Okay, I did tell it to start.
Yeah, we're good. I think it says videos live right now.
Live on Facebook. Webinar is now streaming on Facebook. Hey guys, if you just were looking for us, we were having this fantastic conversation. We're getting so into it that we didn't realize, I think we got kicked out off of Facebook. So
Yeah, I have no idea where we ended.
we talked about that we're in a golden age of wine that has now gone into basically the platinum, basically age of wine. We've gone from the greatest QPR in the world just last year and this year to basically in the middle of a global pandemic where there's a lot of wine and bottle that needs to find a home. So we talked a little bit about how we both see the modern wine market as of right now. And I think Vince made an excellent point that when he drinks a great bottle of champagne, it's amazing that it didn't cost $1,000, thinking about all of the investment, all of the passion, all of the care, all of the hard work that goes into it. So we've really determined that we are living in a golden age. And I will put out there and then let Vince respond that a $10 wine in the market today, grabbed off any supermarket shelf or any liquor store off-premise market in the world, is going to be a higher quality wine than the greatest wines in the world, First Growth and Grand Cru wines 100 years ago being drank by the kings and queens of Europe. We're in a magical time.
Yeah, the note I had when of this when you sent over is wine used to suck was the note I put, because it's amazing how recently we've gotten to this level of quality, and it's very similar to technology, right? It's gotten exponentially better over the last 100 years than it did in the 1,000 years before it.
Well, there's a special word that says that processors double every 5 to 7 years or something, or every 6 months. I don't think wine was like that for much of the world. I would say post-prohibition, United States winemaking took winemaking to a very far point. Once we divorced ourselves from our old winemaking anecdotal beliefs when we came back after prohibition, I think America reinvented wine because we no longer relied on our father's winemaking styles. We had to learn and remember how wine is made scientifically. I will also say, really, I think that it's all really, really important to understand that from a modern perspective, that now it's important to realize we should all have 100 bottles of wine in our house just in case something like this happens and you stops delivering. So you should build yourself a tiny little cellar, and I think that's important. Anything you'd like to add or break down before we jump into number one?
No, let's dive into it. I think I'm just looking at the feed. Just people said they lost at Chenin Blanc. The quick story of that is Chenin Blanc changed the way I think about wine, because it was one of the first times I saw how versatile a single varietal could be. It absolutely blew my mind that it could be sparkling, off dry, dry and sweet. And then even from just the same grape from 60 miles away can be so radically different. And it really got me into, all right, what does the place do for a grape? And so that was kind of one of my aha moments. So that was the quick story behind that.
And maybe you can argue Chenin Blanc is right up there with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. I would say Pinot Noir is the most versatile grape on the planet. You can make sparkling wine. You can make almost a white wine. You can make a light rosé, a medium rosé, light-bodied, medium-bodied, and if you put enough, Argentine Malbec concentrate in, you can make Meiomi. Did I say that out loud? My fault. Sue me, not Vince. I'm the Deep Pockets constellation. Here we go. So,
all right, number one.
We're breaking down 10 things that you probably didn't know about wine. And the first one is why grapes are not served in prison. Wine makes itself. So the waxy substance, if you've ever touched a grape, it kind of looks kind of frosty, and you touch a grape, it gets kind of shiny. That frosty character on the outside of a grape is called bloom, and it has a very special power. It has a positive ionic charge, and it attracts yeast. So yeast that are flying through the air, or yeast that are maybe on the mandibles of an insect or whatever, they hit a grape, that sticks on the grape. So grapes, by their genetic and by their evolution, attract the same yeast that need to be wine. So you take a grape from anywhere in the world, you got a grape in your hand, crush that grape, within a couple minutes, if the temperature isn't freezing, you're going to have fermentation. So the only thing you need to do to make wine is to crush the grape and get the skin, the yeast on the skins integrated with the juice, and you begin the process of fermentation. Now, why is that important? That wine wants to be made. Wine, even the vine understands that wine wants to be made. And the idea that, oh, well, beer is older than wine, really, is it? Maybe because technology and archaeology keep the technology, so we find the archaeological evidence for it. But how long? Think about what it takes to make beer. You got to pick some grain, leave the grain, wet the grain, sprout the grain, and then it has to get dry, and then it has to get wet again to start basically the fermentation of basically the grain. Beer is very difficult to make. Wine makes itself. So wine is probably one of the most ancient beverages on the planet Earth. So wine makes itself. And that's why you'll never get a cluster of grapes with your lunch at a prison, because you would basically just crush a grape, put it in a warm place in your cell. You could come back in a couple of weeks and you would have alcohol. Basically it's advantageous for the plant, it's advantageous for the yeast, and it's advantageous for us. And that's actually part of one of the next parts. But wine makes itself. It is absolutely, of all the things that we do with yeast, making bread, making beer, making pickles, all this stuff, all the different fermentations, yeast being the most important microbial sort of industrial microbe that we've ever had. How lucky we are that wine makes itself. Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, 100. I mean, that's the note I have, is that, beer is a process. Distilling is something that is very much a process. Wine just happens through the miracle of, leaving it out. You could leave wine. If you leave the grapes out in the sun, eventually you're going to get wine. And one of the things I think is funny is that you've seen now a return, with natural wine being such a buzzword right now, and people being very opposed or very against. The people who are against it will say, well, yeah, I could make natural wine. Give me some grapes and I'm going to leave them go for a couple months and I'll come back and I'll bottle it. Whereas I think some of the other people on the other side say, oh, it is something that is just so pure and it gets us more back to our roots. Do you have any thoughts one way or another on that?
Natural wine, I would say that non-interventionist winemakers have the opportunity to make one of two products, and neither of them are wine. The first one is raisins, and the second one is vinegar, because that's what happens when you don't intervene as a human being in the process of making wine. I'm a big fan of Louis Pasteur, who spent most of his time trying to figure out why beer goes bad and how fermentation and glycolysis, primary fermentation, happens. So I would say that I understand that you might want to have a different option. If you really love hazy beer or sour beer or a certain style of beer that I don't like, I'm not going to tell you not to drink it. I find most natural wines undrinkable. I find them to be volatile. I find them to have a haziness and a roughness and an edge to them that I just don't really appreciate. Modern filtration, modern winemaking techniques. I mean, we've been working thousands of years to make good, stable, happy wine. I'm not going to throw away science, Louis Pasteur, Leeuwenhoek, and lens technology and all these things that have helped wine just to make a point that natural wine is somehow healthier, which actually I specifically don't actually believe.
Yeah, I mean, from the ones I've had, I haven't had a single one that I would have again or recommend. And I keep waiting for something to change my mind with it, but I haven't found anything yet.
Yeah, no, and certainly there are. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't. I'm sure there's mind-blowing wines. There are wines that have such amazing natural chemistry, that have such high acidity, low pH, that they are naturally stable. Now, this is what I will say about natural winemaking. I'm not going to add more sulfur dioxide or more copper sulfate to a wine than is absolutely necessary to make a perfectly stable, safe wine. That's why I love making wines that have good amounts of acidity. Here's another thing that our viewers probably don't know, that if you make a very lean Chardonnay at 3.1 pH, which is mouth-searing acidity, maybe 8-9 grams of acid, you only need 10 parts per million to make that wine stable at 0.8 molecular stability in SO2. I'm talking chemistry, just trust me. If the wine is a 4.0 pH, which is about the same acid level as a soft, plush Napa, Cabernet, or Merlot, very ripe, you need 100 parts free SO2 in that wine. And trust me, to get 100 parts free, you're going to need a lot more SO2 than just 100 parts. So the less ripe, the higher the acidity and the more the verve and the cut of a wine, the less SO2 you need. So if you don't like the idea of, from the last 3,000 years of using sulfur dioxide to keep a wine stable, you have options. Natural wine being one of them. Another one is buy sparkling wine, because sparkling wine does not have much SO2 in it because it has to be able to bubble again, or buy Sauvignon Blanc, buy Chenin Blanc, buy Gewürztraminer, buy Riesling. These wines all have incredibly small amounts of SO2 because of their high acidity.
Yeah, 100%. All right, we should keep going to number 2.
Number 2, wine is likely much older than we think. That the human relationship with wine goes back into a hazy prehistory that's very difficult to talk about. And here's the reason why. How long have grapes been around? Hundreds of millions of years. How long has yeast been around? Longer than that. How long have grapes fermented? Well, were they picked? Can they ferment on the vine? They can. So how long has it been since humans or pre-humans have been consuming? Were there grapes around when Homo habilis or Neanderthal or Australopithecus afarensis or the robust Australopithecines were around? Of course there was alcohol. Were there trees falling over full of honey that got watered and the water got diluted and it turned into like free mead? Human noses, we're going to find sources of alcohol. We're going to find sources of food, and we're going to talk a little bit about that too. But the most important thing here is ceramic. Until we have ceramics, 9,000 to 10,000 BCE in China, 6,000 to 7,000 BCE before Common Era, what we would normally say is BC. So what, 10,000, 11,000 years ago, the Chinese had pottery. About 8,000 years ago, the Europeans had pottery. Before then, we have no idea, because ceramic is the first thing humans use that actually absorbs tartaric acid and malbidin. And if you have tartaric and malbidin within the ceramic, the molecular structure of ceramic, you've got one thing for sure. That vessel had wine in it. So we know that people were trading wine from village to village 9,000 years ago. And I'll actually put up a picture right now because it's much prettier than me. So that is the oldest vessel that has ever been discovered ever that contained wine. This was from almost 9,000 years ago in Tbilisi, Georgia. And in Tbilisi, Georgia, not only is it a wine vessel for containing wine, my guess is this was actually used for fermentation, and I'll tell you why. Number one, it has no handles. So to carry this thing would take 4 people on the sides, which would not make much sense. It is decorated with basically a motif of a grape cluster. And Dr. Patrick McGovern at the University of Pennsylvania about 4 years ago did an assay and found out that the interior of this vessel contains both tartaric acid and malbidin. So this vessel from 8,500 years ago contained wine. My guess is from the shape, this was a fermentation vessel that would have been buried. It would have been buried in the ground, and the ground would have
kept it cool,
insulated it. So instead of the fermentation rising up to 90, 95 degrees, the fermentation would have only hit 70 degrees, and you would have ended up having the same impact as a jacketed stainless steel tank because of the genius of human discernment that occurred thousands of years ago.
Where was this from?
Tbilisi, Georgia.
Okay, I was going to say Georgia.
The real Georgia.
Yeah.
Okay.
Georgia and how am I in this here? Perfect. Georgia, and then I've read, Georgia is one of the main hubs, and then Lebanon, Iran, Greece, Sicily were all kind of happening around the same time, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, no, I mean, certainly Transcaucasia. So wine really was developed as a result of a domestication event. And that domestication event happened about 10,000 years ago between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. So Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, as well as the uplands of Anatolia and Turkey and Iran is really the cradle of wine civilization. And in those areas, that's where the first grapevine was domesticated. And believe it or not, the domestication event represents that domesticated grape is the mother, father grape. Every grape in the world that produces vinifera wine can be traced back to one single domesticated grapevine about 10,000 years ago. Pretty absolutely freaking incredible. Oh, check this out. So this is a archaeological site in Ereni, and this is in Armenia. Armenia, one of the most important ancient wine cultures in the world. Try to find a village in Armenia that is not covered with grape arbors, and any refrigerator in summer that does not have a jar of Ereni red wine. So these would have been underground cisterns in which you can see some of the areas. There are sort of channels that have been wiped away. This would have been 7,000 years ago. 7,000 years ago, people were bringing grapes into this special cave in Ereni that had a lot of different angles and curves. So the temperature in this cave stayed extremely cool, even the hottest parts of summer. And then they would dig these underground cisterns. So these channels would have directed trodden, foot stomped grape juice to fall into these little kind of holes that you see. And those holes might have contained hundreds and hundreds of gallons of this juice. And then the juice would have undergone natural fermentation within these underground cisterns, and then drawn out of these cisterns to actually, once the wine was completed, and then probably or left in the cisterns to age before it was drunk. So crazy stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I got to say about that, before we go to the next one, is just that is one of the reasons why wine has always been fascinating for me. If you're into history, like, it has that in spades. If you're into geology, it's literally everything. If you're into art, if you're into the science behind it, it has everything. And even if you look at recent history and you look at how grapes got even to California, and it was, missionaries coming up from Mexico planting for the church. And so if you dig hard enough in wine, you can find any sort of field that you're interested in, and you can also just drink it and not worry about it. But if you have a passion, you can find that through wine, which I always find so amazing.
Yeah, no, it's like reading James Joyce. You can get through the novel and just let it play over your head, or you can read every piece of criticism and get as deep as you want. You can spend your entire life on one chapter of Ulysses and never get tired of it. And that's exactly like wine. But the cool thing about wine, to a certain extent, literature doesn't necessarily get you a little tipsy or a little intoxicated. Wine does. Wine is both lazy and incredibly intensive in that sense. This is another forest archaeological site in Georgia, and these are kvevari. So let's make sure that we use the correct term, because I hear people talk about, as far as what they call the vessels. If the vessel is used for fermentation, call it a kvevari to give respect to the people in Transcaucasia and in this area who invented this technology. And if it is a vessel for carrying wine from place to place that's an amphora. An amphora is used for transporting wine. A kvevari is used for fermentation. So when you see the huge vessel within a winery, realize that is not an amphora. That is a kvevari. Okay, let me get rid of that. We're back. Okay, so let's go on. So it's much older. Let's talk a little bit about fermentation. So number 3, I said that yeast turning sugars into alcohol hundreds of millions of years ago. It was one of the first chemical bondage changes in natural history that produced energy. So if you want to talk about what produced energy on the planet Earth from a microbial perspective, yeast being a single cell fungi. So yeast are fungus. They're a single cell fungi. And I will show you a beautiful picture of yeast. This is yeast budding. Those tiny little things that you see coming off of a few of these round structures are the yeast budding. So the yeast are basically consuming disaccharide sugar, and they're basically converting that disaccharide sugar into acetaldehyde into acetate, acetate into pyruvite into ethanol. To convert 1 teaspoon of sugar, there are 3 billion chemical bond changes as a result of yeast turning disaccharide sugar, fermentable sugar, into alcohol. If you think alcohol is made by yeast and all that happens is it makes some carbon dioxide on one side and some ethanol, You don't understand the complexity of this. It is absolutely fascinating. And if you want to get a good indication of that, Ian Tattersall's book, which is right here, A Natural History of Wine, is definitely one that will float your boat. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and what I think people don't understand too is how much of the magic happens from the yeast. You know, if you took the grape juice of two different grapes, they would probably not be far off from each other. It's the fermentation that really makes all the magical flavors that we associate with wine.
Oh, there's no doubt. And for instance, fermenting Pinot Noir produces more esters than any other fermentation on the planet Earth. And some of those esters, from a molecular basis, are no different than the esters that actually smell like what we describe. So if we say it smells like blackberry, or if we say it smells like cherry, we're just not making stuff up. What we're doing is actually referencing the actual esters that are produced as a result of primary fermentation in Pinot Noir grapes. It actually produces the esters that are molecularly indistinguishable from what we smell in blackberries. So that begs the question. I'm going to go all like, sort of 9 weeks on you. If I cut open an apple and put it under your nose and you were wearing a blindfold, how many times out of 100 would you know it was an apple? 100 times?
Yeah, I think it'd be fairly distinct, right?
Why can't you smell apple esters in wine every time?
My guess would be because you have other flavors, others competing with it.
You're too young for this, but when I was a kid, there were channels on our TV that we didn't pay for, and you could sometimes see
Oh, I know that.
all the I guess what we called it. I don't even remember what snow, right? The snow
Yeah,
on
the static. Yeah.
I remember me and my brother's like, I think there's a naked women. You know, what is this? Like, is this like channel 1? Can you see that? And this might be semi-pornographical. Can you see it? Can you see it? No, through the white noise, we understand wine. So you have to understand the vinous noise of wine. So I always say, take a wine that doesn't smell like much, Peter Bella Chablis, Peter Bella Mountain Burgundy, put some blackberries in it, shake it up, and then smell it. And then you'll understand what blackberries smell like in the context of fermentation. So that's definitely one thing that I would always recommend. Okay, one thing I wanted to also mention about why yeast, and this is included in this whole idea of glycolysis before we get into number 4, and that is that yeast produces alcohol. Why? Why does yeast do what it does? And yeast produces alcohol for one reason: to keep other microbes and other animals from come and eating its sugar. It's the same thing as if you have a brother or sister and there's only one Twinkie in the house and you have to like leave your Twinkie on the table with your brothers and sisters at the table. What do? You lick it and you put it down and say, okay, eat my Twinkie now because I just put spit all over it. You come back and your Twinkie's still there. That's what yeast do. They consume the disaccharide sugar. They produce ethanol to produce a toxin to basically keep other animals from eating this oozing, wonderful, overripe fruit, which is a huge benefit economically and microbial and everything else for the animals walking around the forest. So yeast produce ethanol to keep other animals from using its food source. The problem is they ended up producing a toxin that just happens to be 4 times as nutrient dense as carbohydrates. So it turns out that ethanol, if we could figure out how to use ethanol without becoming poisoned, we would have an amazing additional nutriment in our arboreal, fruit-eating, fruitivorous sort of life. So yeast actually put us all on an evolutionary battle to see what animal could first detoxify ethanol to use it as an energy source by the body. And it just so happened that mammals, birds, and everyone else, all the different animals in the forest, developed an ability to detoxify alcohol and use it as an energy source. And then it actually had the byproduct of giving us a pleasant intoxication, which drove us even further into wanting to find alcohol as a source of nutriment and pleasure within that forest. Crazy stuff.
That's hilarious. So it essentially backfired.
Yes, it turned into an evolutionary battle that basically gave us alcohol, and now we just use Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is the yeast that produces bread. Bread comes out of the oven at about 3% alcohol.
No.
Yeah, and as it cools, it loses its alcohol by virtue of blowing the alcohol off with the heat. But if we didn't have a liver, the human liver, 10% of our liver's enzymatic function is to produce an enzyme called ADHD, just like me, which is alcohol dehydrogenase enzyme. The ADH enzyme basically knocks a hydrogen ion off of ethanol and makes it aldehydic. The aldehyde is absorbed as acetate in the human body and it becomes energy. Without our human liver and its capacity to produce this enzyme, we would, and one reason why Native Americans, Inuits, and a lot of people in Northern Asia, they have the ADH1B enzyme mutation, which means because their cultures never drank alcohol the same way that Europeans and other cultures did when we were evolving into alcohol drinkers, they didn't have that. So if you've ever met someone that has one drink and flushes red, that's how all of us would react to alcohol if we didn't have this magical liver. And if you're a religious person, God doesn't make mistakes. He gave us a liver that gives us the ability to drink alcohol on a regular basis. And if 10% of our liver's function is to produce this enzyme, my thing is then 10% of the daily calorie intake for human beings should be alcohol.
There you go.
Yeah,
200 calories a day.
Yeah, absolutely. Good stuff.
All right, we on number 4?
Let's go. Yeah. So number 4 is that in the ancient world, wine was never drank straight. Wine was always mixed with water. The Greeks and the Romans both believed that wine consumed without mixing it was incredibly barbaric. In fact, the word barbarian comes from Greek barbaros, or the barbarai. And the barbarai were basically people who drank their wine unmixed, generally the Gauls, because they traded wine a lot with the Hellenic and the Roman world. So the idea that if you drank wine by itself, if you drank wine straight, man, you had a little bit of a problem. So the idea was that you should be able to drink wine 3 to 4 hours at a symposia in the Greek world. And what would come out of your mouth would be brilliant. You wouldn't be staggering. You wouldn't be slurring. You wouldn't be making bad comments about the lute player or whoever who's at the symposia. The idea was you could drink as a great Athenian or as a great Roman, and then stand up 4 hours into a drinking contest and stand up and make a political discourse or recite a poem, sing a song, make a political statement. And you could make it with a passion that was driven by the wine, but wasn't hampered by the wine. The idea was personality goes through the prism of wine, and then it breaks into the world in a way that if the alcohol makes your message weaker, you're a weak person. If alcohol makes your message stronger and gives you more of a rhetorical vehicle to be passionate about what you're talking about, that's what wine was for. It was to give us all passion and drive and all of that. So I always found that absolutely spectacular. And then also in the same idea, wine was not only drunk straight in the Roman and the Greek culture, but it was also preserved in very various and freaky ways, like in vessels lined in terebinth resin, which is now known as retsina. Retsina actually does moderate
the pine tree kind of, yeah.
It slows down the oxidation of a wine. Wines, some of them at the top of the vessel were topped with olive oil, and the olive oil would make basically a airtight seal. There was also seawater was sometimes used, which is pretty gross unless you really enjoy Goes style beers, which is basically the same idea that seawater can somehow protect it. It's hard to argue that democracy wasn't partially driven by this idea of the symposia and wine, where Athenians would get together, drink for 4 hours, basically make arguments, and then basically come to consensus. And that consensus is really the basis of modern democracy and Athenian democracy, which I found really interesting. And then one thing I was going to share, and then we'll move on to number 5, is this guy.
You pull that up too. Again, one of the things that got cut off is that, back up until the last 100 years, we didn't really have vessels and we didn't have ways of preserving wine. So the wine you got was very, very low quality. So we're lucky to be around in 2020 where we have all this modern technology to get wine, the way it should be tasted. I have a note here that our forefathers were drinking Madeira because they needed to get wine that could survive the journey because they weren't making wine in America yet. And so, and that was the closest thing you could get to actual wine for them. And so much of it just came from necessity, and it would compromise the wine.
And Madeira and Solera sherry, a lot of it stylistically was driven by the idea that when the wine arrived in the New World or through a trip over the ocean that may or may not have cooked it, Madeira and sherry were the only two wines. And clearly those were the reasons why Thomas Jefferson drank so much sherry. And remember, Thomas Jefferson was considered one of the soberest men of his generation, and he drank between 1 and 3 bottles of wine a day. I would say.
Now, were they watering it down like you mentioned?
No. They would be drinking it about the same. This is just an example. So the cratier is the mixing vessel. The amphore would be used to pour the wine into the cratier, and then the hydria, you would recognize hydria as being the Greek root for water, would be the water add. How much water to how much wine? It depended what you were doing. If you were having an orgy, 1-to-1. If you were having a political or a more intense discussion, it might be 4-to-1. If you were listening to music, it was very popular at these symposia to watch pornographic live sex acts. And if you were doing that, it might be 2-to-1 or maybe 3-to-1. But the idea is, how long was the symposia and how long were people going to be drinking and how long did people want to maintain their sobriety? And the one thing that I failed to mention is the actual word barbarian comes from Greek barbarai, which means the person who goes who can't speak because they're too drunk because they drink their wine unmixed. So the idea of barbarian means he who does not drink his wine mixed, which I find interesting, which means, hey, I'm a barbarian.
Very good. All right, let's move to number 5.
Let's do it. So the first time wine was ever consumed in a big, important way, politically and philosophically, was in 870 BC, in the opening of the Assyrian city of Nimrod. It's actually biblical. And the king, which was King Assur-Nasirpal II, I practiced that like 12 times. Let's try that again. Assur-Nasirpal. He invited 70,000 people to the opening of this beautiful village, this beautiful town of Nimrod, which was one of the great 7 wonders of the world at the time. So for the 70,000 guests, he brought like 300,000 skins of beer or jars of beer, but he brought 10,000 skins of wine. And check this out. This is the first archaeological picture in the history of the world to show the consumption of wine in outside of Egypt. There were some bas reliefs. This is a bas relief, and this was a bas relief that was created to celebrate the opening of Nimrod. And you can see the king right there in a culture, the Assyrians. Now, the Assyrians were so into beer that you can argue that a modern civilization and the agricultural revolution in Mesopotamia was driven by the desire to make beer. Bread is about almost 3,000 years later of a development than beer. So beer is just solid bread. Beer was the most important thing for driving the agricultural revolution, as far as I'm concerned. But here's the king of Assyria sitting, being taken care of, and not drinking beer, which would have been absolutely de rigueur to his culture, but he was drinking wine. This was a flex. This was a huge, huge flex of the king saying, look how freaking rich I am. I brought wine in. And anyone who can afford wine obviously is one of the great rulers of the ancient world.
That's funny. Well, and some things never change. You still have a class of wine elites that tend to keep it that way. And we've done a good job, I feel like, in the last, just since I've started, honestly, the last 5 to 10 years of really changing that perception. But it's funny that still exists to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, it was a flex, but at the same time, now we're so lucky that for $20 and less, you can drink, wine from almost any country in the world. You can travel the wine world in a glass. And one thing that's so important right now in the middle of all this madness is the fact that we can still go any place that we want, as long as it produces interesting alcohol. I can go to Milan and drink Fernet.
Yep.
I can go.
I say it all the time that it's the closest you can get to a place and a specific place and time for wine, and specifically, as much as liquor can do that, wine is tied to that year, right? And it's tied to that very, very specific plot of land. And so it's the closest you can get to somewhere without actually being there. And people always say, what's your favorite wines? And I go, well, it depends on what I'm eating that night. Because I'm very big on pairing and trying to plan the whole meal from start to finish, so it feels like I'm virtually, somewhere else. So if I'm doing an Italian meal, if it grows together, it goes together. I'm going to try and find something from the same place.
In the world of alcohol, the way I describe it, if I'm doing something standing up or walking, I'm drinking beer. If I'm sitting at a table with food, I'm drinking wine. And if I'm between table and the floor, I'm drinking spirits. So it's pretty much exactly what's going on. Let's get on to number 6. We're having a good time.
Do you want to?
Let's go small, and then we'll do a question and answer. I want to make sure
cool.
It's all the content they can. This is really cool, and this is something that I always think, my gosh, can this actually be real? And the answer is yes.
Are you going to show that map?
Yes.
Yeah, it blows my mind every time.
Is it true that wine is grown between the 30th and 50th parallel of latitude, both in the north and south hemispheres, between the areas where the average temperature lies between 10 and 20 degrees Celsius? Now, first of all, I always say that, that wine is bears a lot of responsibility for the modern world, both by science, lens technology, the invention of the printing press, which we may or may not talk about, but all these things are poetically responsible, or wine is poetically responsible for. Now look at where the bulges are. Nice big bulge around the west coast of the United States, shrinking a little bit on the east coast of the United States, implying maybe the west coast would have a superior climate for wine, which I actually believe it does. And then look at that gorgeous bulge right around Europe, to include also a little bit of Libya and Northern Africa, obviously where some amazing wines are also produced in North Africa. Remember, there was a Egyptian wine industry before Western Europe had ever produced a high quality bottle of wine, due to basically the Canaanites bringing that culture down. And then now you know why China's screwed, ladies and gentlemen. China, sorry, China, revenge for Wuhan, I guess. Look at that, but it's pretty skinny. It's pretty skinny, but notice it does bulge out around Japan. And if you've never had a good Koshu wine or a Merlot from around the area where those greatest Koshus are grown, they do a pretty good job. In the Southern hemisphere, you got a really nice big bulge around South America, for Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, and believe it or not, parts of Brazil. And then just enough to catch the Cape, to say, hey, Stellenbosch, let's grow some good Cab and some Chenin Blanc, a little Pinotage, if you will. And then, wow, look at New Zealand just making the grade. And of course, what the New Zealanders like to call the Western Island, otherwise known as Australia. If you want to remember the Australian wine growing regions, just remember Pam's booty, PAMSB, Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, and of course, Brisbane. So that's the mnemonic that I use to remember which is that. All right. For some reason, I went back to our friend in Assyria, probably because
And so the note I have here, because we talked a little bit about, all right, so what does the future of that map look like, right? If hypothetically, climates go up, where are you looking? I always tell people, if you're looking to buy land, start looking more north, right? So you can future-proof yourself a little bit. But what happens in some of these regions that are already hot as it is? Let's say, think Paso Robles, or even some places in Northern California that are already, pushing the edge of ripeness.
I think what
the edge of over ripeness. You're
going to see what happened last year in Bordeaux, the approval of 17 new grapes in the non-cru, non-numbered growths. So anything that is, I think, cru bourgeois or lower now has the opportunity to use any grapes they damn well please, almost. I mean, Touriga Nacional is now approved for Bordeaux. So you change the grapes you grow, you use your viticultural and multi-generational power to grow the best wine you can, and look at grafting Fortunately, production vineyards only last about 40 years, and then you start losing production. So the tradition throughout the world is you replant your father's vineyard, you replant your mother's vineyard, you replant once a generation. And that means every generation has the opportunity to basically revise and renew whatever varietal focus there is. This happens all the time in Italy, especially, you look at the regions, around Chianti, and all of a sudden, a lot of the people kind of got tired of struggling with Sangiovese, and decided to throw some Merlot or some Cab or some Syrah and make a super Tuscan. So those young whippersnappers screwing with what we did are always going to piss us off, but they're going to always drive the imagination and the future of wine industry in whatever direction every generation wants. So every generation has the opportunity to completely revise and throw out. And that could easily be one of these top 10, is that by virtue of having to replant a vineyard every generation, sure, a vineyard can go 100 years and you're going to get one cluster per plant, and you better be charging $1,000 for that wine, because that's what the economics are going to justify. So if you want 3 tons per acre, you got to replant your vineyard, because you're never going to get 3 tons per acre out of a 100-year-old vineyard.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess what would be really interesting is, there are some places that I think would be more able to transition than others. If you think about places that are very, very iconic for the grape they grow, I'm thinking France in particular, Burgundy and Pinot Noir. Do they produce bigger styles of Pinot? I mean, I guess, for them, I think that's probably what they'll do. But what a change that's going to be from the Pinots of now, and even the Pinots that were, 20 years before, 30 years before.
When do they go to Gamay? Because that's what happens. Gamay comes south.
I know, the bastard grape that is my favorite that they've outlawed.
Cru Beaujolais, 1395, Duke Philip the Bold. We'll get there. I will also, I will say that, Burgundy used to say that places that got that ripeness was a fait accompli, that ripeness was automatic every year, produce awful wines. And now, of course, that Burgundy is getting riper and riper. They're like, oh, vintage of the century, vintage of the decade. Great. Well, welcome to the new world. Now you could argue that Burgundy is basically dealing with a lot of the same stuff we have now, which leads us perfectly, talking to Burgundy, into number 7, which is Duke Philip the Bold. And I do have a picture of this wonderful person being crowned. Unfortunately, it's a small picture, but there's Duke Philip. And so Duke Philip was one of the Valois Dukes, and the Valois Dukes controlled the entire area, generally from Austria all the way through Burgundy. And Duke Philip was the first Duke of Burgundy. And as a result, he understood the powers we mentioned earlier of the wines that were being produced in Burgundy. They were absolutely vital to be shown at every major court in Western Europe. So again, if you were in Germany or you were in Sweden or Norway, you would have to get Burgundy wines, which means you have to be friends with Duke Philip. And Duke Philip the Bold signed the Edict of 1395, which outlawed the growing of any red grape besides Pinot Noir and Burgundy. And basically that restriction is still active today. So as of right now, I think what he was saying is, if, from a sideways perspective, we ain't growing no effing Gamay. Will we have to go backwards on the Edict of 1395? And interestingly enough, Pinot Blanc was part of Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, and the Romanée-Conti vineyard was 10% Pinot Blanc until 1956. So until 1956, Romanée-Conti was actually co-fermented with Pinot Blanc, the same way Côte Rôtie would be Syrah co-fermented with.
That's super interesting. By the way, for the people asking questions, I think we're going to plow through all 10, then we'll get to them, right?
Yeah, and we're going a little faster now. Any comments, Burgundy?
Oh yeah, no, just that my note is that Gamay has such a special place in my heart. And if you bring it to a blind tasting, it always is lights out. It always will over deliver for the money. And what I would ask you is actually, why are there no places making, or there are maybe, but you don't hear about them making domestic Gamay or making from other places. Why does it not work anywhere else?
Willamette, Santa Barbara County, Edna Valley.
Does it work?
It does, and there's a lot of interest in it. In fact, I don't want to ruin anyone's, but there's an incredibly famous Santa Rita Hills vineyard that might be the first Santa Rita Hills vineyard and the flagship vineyard in the Santa Rita Hills. And the winemakers there actually fight over a Pinot Noir block that ain't Pinot Noir. It's Gamay. There is a decent amount of Pinot Noir being produced in the New World that is actually Gamay. It actually produces a little bit of a richer, riper wine. You can make a wine very similar to a kind of a Meiomi style out of Gamay that if you label it as Pinot Noir would get a lot of traction. So
interesting. Yeah. I hope it continues. And I knew there was people messing around in Oregon, and I have to imagine Santa Barbara would be perfect climate for it.
So the next number 8 is going to be all about America. It's about the power of America transforming the entire world of wine. And that is the fact. And I will put this one up. That every vineyard in the world right now, I mean, 95% of the world's vineyards are planted on American rootstock that grows between Minnesota and Texas. And Charles Darwin is likely to blame for saving the wine world because of from this destruction and misery. Phylloxera attacked all European grapevines between the end of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s. And as a result, Charles Darwin's Origin of Species came out about the exact same time. So while France was trying to figure out what the hell was going on and while their vineyards were dying, a couple scientists in France were reading Origin of Species and asking, if Darwin's right, the answer is we need to replant all of French vineyards on American rootstock because the soil-borne insect, this phylloxera bug, was eating these European grapevines roots as if there were a smorgasbord. And maybe if the bug that was originally in America had a relationship with the vines that were in America, that the vines in America would have hundreds of millions of years of extra evolutionary protection against phylloxera. It turns out they were absolutely right. When a phylloxera bug stings a European vine, that vine root dies. If a phylloxera stings an American vine, such as Vitis riparia, which you could, if you ever go to Minnesota, Minneapolis, walk the Hennepin Bridge, and you will see these grapes and this actual variety growing up trees right there next to the Mississippi River and the sort of headwaters of the Mississippi in Minnesota. And as a result, when phylloxera stings this vine, the vine root bifurcates and becomes stronger. So that's so important that the Romani Conti, Echezot, Latour, Cheval Blanc, Mouton Rothschild, every great wine you can name in Europe that costs over $1,000, all those vines are on American rootstock. So go everywhere between sort of these areas are so incredibly important to understand how America basically saved the world of wine. Well,
Who's still on original rootstock? What places in the world?
South America, very isolated parts of the United States. Bien Nacido and Santa Maria, because of the sandy soil, doesn't really support a phylloxera sort of population. Those would be some places that I would think of. The more isolated the area, probably the better. Phylloxera basically was born in the eastern United States, and the reason why Thomas Jefferson's vineyards at Monticello all failed. I am going to run off to the restroom for 2 minutes so I don't look incredibly worried about how long this is going to go. A minute, because unfortunately I was drinking maybe a beer as I was preparing for this. But the next thing we're going to be talking about is a little bit. No, I'll just throw this out there. I got the bladder to handle it. Is Robert Dudley at UC Berkeley in the 80s came up with a drunken monkey hypothesis. So I'll put up a picture of monkeys, and then I'll give you the drunken monkey hypothesis, and I'd like to hear what Vince has to say. Our primordial fruit-eating heritage, the scent of spontaneously fermenting fruit, guided humankind's ancient arboreal ancestors to the ripest and most calorie-laden fruit in the tree. So the idea of human senses were also driven. Why do humans have color vision? Is we wanted to see the ripest fruit in the forest. Why do we have such great noses that can sense danger and food and sex from a distance? Is to smell this stuff. And the aroma of alcohol leads humans and human ancestors to the ripest fruit in the forest, and as a result sets us up as sort of either modern or semi-arboreal people. And this really drives the idea of human culture, that it starts with the monkeys, and almost every mammal will be led to the smell of fermentation. So I'll be right back.
He left me on the question too that I literally wrote on my notes. I wrote question mark, question mark, question mark, because that theory is something I had never heard. I believe it because it's coming from Wes's mouth. And so I usually tend to trust what he has to say on any of this. I'm going to say hi to some of the people who are here and start going through the comments just because we have a second here. See if anybody had any questions that we're looking at. And if you have any questions, start throwing them out because we're basically on number 9. So we're going to go to number 10 here in a minute, and then we're going to take your questions. Only 100. Is there a key development that launched the improvement of today's wines? I think Wes is going to know more as a winemaker, but I think one of the big things that he would say is native versus cultured yeast. Being able to control what type of yeast and where it ferments to, and then where it dies, I have a feeling would be one of the main things he would say. Sorry, Wes, I started taking questions just to get into it because I don't have a ton to say on the monkey. I told him I looked at the notes for monkey, I wrote question mark when I looked at it because that is nothing I had heard before, which is amazing. But I told him I believe it because it came from your mouth. So
I wouldn't have brought it up, but I did read that John Paul II said there's compelling evidence for evolution. So I knew even with a crucifix on, you'd be happy to talk about it because your boy John Paul thought it was an interesting conversation. Native versus, there's no such thing as native yeast. All yeast are feral. So when people say, first of all, we just found out like less than 10 years ago from some research in Italy that yeast overwinter in the guts of wasps and yellow jackets. So yellow jackets are the delivery mechanism for basically all yeast. Every single yellow jacket born anywhere in the world is born with Saccharomyces cerevisiae in its gut. And so as these little bugs travel and chew on grapes, they're also depositing yeast basically from both ends. Nicest way to say that. So thank goodness for those yellow jackets that used to sting me and I used to hate, because it turns out between them and the wasps, they're delivering yeast throughout vineyards all over the world. So one way yeast does travel through the air, it's ambient, but it also gets delivered a lot by these Italian scientists, brilliant Italian scientists figured out it's a lot of insects moving yeast from place to place.
And you see so many vineyards encouraging that especially in the last couple of years, so many having beehives on property, encouraging that flowers and things that'll attract that.
We had an apiary at Clopepi, because I love to make mead. And second, I wanted to taste what Pinot Noir honey would taste like. And the problem is we would have to actually have 0 other flowers on the property, and we would only be able to allow the bees to come out for 2 weeks out of the year. But could you imagine Pinot Noir honey? Like honey made specifically just from the pollen from Pinot Noir? It'd be special. All right, so we got to number 9 on the drunken monkey hypothesis. The reason I brought that up is because obviously human evolution absolutely fascinates me, and the idea that one reason that we have the liver that we have to process alcohol is because of our frutivore ancestors were so driven to find these fermenting fruits in the wild, not only to be led to the ripest fruit, but also for the nutriment add of the calories that alcohol would add. So I find that stuff absolutely fascinating. And brings us back to the idea that the pleasure we get from alcohol may go back so many millions of years that it's absolutely fascinating. I love that stuff. And then number 10, we're down. Last one. Here we go. Let's finish up big. So I wanted to end it with something really special, and that is that, believe it or not, I'm not going to go back to the Noah hypothesis that basically between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, one domestication event domesticated a vine, and that vine moved throughout the world, and every wine in the world can be traced back to that. That's true. I want to go a little bit further into Europe and talk a little bit that most varietal wines, and I'm going to put up a last picture. Let's see, share my screen, show you guys a grape that you might not, I've never actually tasted a varietal Gouis Blanc. That is Gouis Blanc. And Gouis Blanc is Gouais Blanc. It is a grape that is considered one of the most ancient grape varietals in the world. So most varietal wines, I would say 90%, if I say, give me your 10 favorite wines, likely if you are an American, all 10 wines that you mentioned can be traced back to a massively important genetic progression of grapes that happened between the 12th and the 19th century in southern France, specifically the Languedoc region. And that is 4 grapes that changed the world. 4 grapes that has given us almost every grape we can name. And that's Gouis Blanc, the one you see in front of you. And if for some reason there's a box in front of it, I'll get rid of it. And Clairette, which is another white grape, which is another amazing grape. Cab Franc, which is, the brother grape to Cabernet Sauvignon, Sauvignon Blanc, and so many other varieties that we recognize, and Pinot Noir. So take Pinot Noir, Cab Franc, Gouis Blanc, and Clairette. You've got almost the entire world of wine. Those are really the progenitor grapes that have driven the generation of almost all varietals. And again, grapes do not breed true like tomatoes or cannabis. Grapes are constantly in a genetic mutation. So every shoot that comes out of every grape every year, every shoot is genetically distinct from every shoot in the vineyard, in the world. There's no such thing as any shoot that is genetically similar, exactly similar to any other shoot in the world. So when you look at a vineyard, realize what you're looking at is a constant genetic mutation. And that's the reason why we've got thousands of different wines we can taste. And it is genetically modified organism. It is every grape you'll ever taste. There's no such thing as a wine that it's not GMO, but it's GMO as a result of the genius of human discernment, not of us screwing around with the genes in a lab. I'd worry a little bit about, Frankenwine and genetic mutations in labs, but, as far as humans using sort of their brains to breed things, breed grass into wheat, to breed a wolf into a Labrador retriever, to breed one grape into 30,000 varieties or whatever. It's a pretty amazing thing. So to me, that huge cluster of grapes represents so many different varieties that we enjoy today. Whatever's in our glass is probably related to that grape a couple thousand years ago. So that's pretty much what I have. I would add Muscat of Alexandria was probably another grape that has probably been incredibly important in adding the aromatic flavor to so many aromatic white wines that we drink.
Well, that shines such a light on. So many times when I talk to winemakers about either their vineyards or a region, they'll say, "Oh, we think this is this," or "We think maybe this varietal might actually be this." And I go, "Well, how do you not know?" And that shines some light into me. And why? Because it's constantly evolving and mutating. And so, you would have to go through a pretty expensive process to know what everything is.
I did a speech with a geneticist called "There's No Such Thing as Chardonnay," and all we did was freak people the F out. There is no such thing as Chardonnay. There's no such thing as Syrah. If you look at a Syrah vineyard, you're basically looking. Say there's 1,000 vines in your backyard, and it's Syrah. What you're going to end up seeing is maybe there's 20 shoots coming off of every vine. So you've got 20,000 shoots of Syrah in your backyard, and not one single one of those 20,000 shoots is genetically similar to any other shoot. Similar, yes. Identical, no. There's no such thing. Every cluster that makes wine is genetically distinct from every other cluster that makes wine, unless that cluster was growing on the same shoot as another cluster. So genetically, unless you really understand genetics, if you do, you are dumbfounded the same way that if you don't understand genetics. It's that complicated. It's so complicated that if you don't understand it, you understand it just, it's like quantum physics. Oh, wait.
The more you know, the less you know.
By measuring it, the result changes? Yeah, that's pretty much genetics in wine. Let's answer some questions. I'm ready.
Cool. All right. So I had gone to, somebody had asked, what is the single thing you could point to, or not single thing, but a couple things in wine evolution that you could point to over the last 100 years that has upped the quality drastically of the wines that we have today?
I don't think it's the genetics of the vine. I think it's a matter of modern inventions such as stainless steel tanks, glass lined tanks, and specifically ozone machines. Ozone machines were invented in 1896 in England, but now ozone machines are affordable. So instead of mixing up all these chemicals and putting chemicals all over the surfaces that the wine's going to be in, we just spray it with an ozone machine. O3 hits, basically kills the microbes and is released as oxygen. So we've gone from producing all these nasty chemicals that go into our drains at the winery to just using ozone. So ozone is definitely one. I would say modern grapevine nurseries are incredibly important that are using genetic material from University of California, Davis at Foundation Plant Material Service, from MTOV, which is in Burgundy. So it is a matter of defining these genetic accessions that we call clones. I hate the word clone because there's no such thing as a clone in the world of, there's clones of tomatoes, clones of cannabis, but certainly no clones of grapes. It just doesn't exist. So what is clone 667 of Pinot Noir? Well, it is a moment of time where a genetic accession was captured, and as it grows, we take cuttings and call it 667. So it's a matter of UC Davis, it's a matter of the University of Dijon, it's a matter of all these universities the last 100 years, and it's more than 100 years old, but Louis Pasteur was the first guy in 1855 to figure out how fermentation works under a microscope. Before then, wine, the French term, le bon Dieu fait le vin, which just means God is good and he makes the wine. That was the belief that wine was just a gift. The word for breath, what is Latin for breath? Spiritus. And the idea that fermentation, if you watch it, it breathes. I have a odd theory that the idea of spirit and the idea of breath came from this idea of spirit. And why do we call spirit spirits? Because spiritus, it breathes when it ferments, it moves. So I kind of think that the idea of understanding fermentation was incredibly important in making better wine. Sanitation, proper wine chemicals, better yeast strains, more varietals available. I think it goes way, way, way beyond what happened in the vineyard. But I would say in the last 100 years, the most important thing in the vineyard was the publication of Sunlight into Wine by Dr. Richard Smart in Tasmania, a brilliant man who did for viticulture really what Louis Pasteur did for enology. If you're interested in viticulture, look up Dr. Richard Smart because he is a genius of a man. And I got to introduce him once at a lecture. And after what I said about him, he asked, would you follow me and introduce me everywhere you go? Because I guess I am the only person in the world that understands how important he is and understands that I think he's as important as he does. And unfortunately,
just that he democratized all that information.
His accent is so deep. I had a hard time actually understanding what the hell he was saying, but really a genius of a man. And if you'll pay $75 for this little spiral bound magazine, you will become a better viticulturist. Very
cool. All right. Christine asks, what do you think of wine companies that say there is no sugar in their wines? Well, Wes probably can speak more, but every wine has a little bit of sugar, right? You can't get rid of all the sugar. It's impossible. Now there's two types of sugar. There's the residual sugar from the grapes, and then are they adding sugar to beef up the wine?
Correct. So either you're going to stop a fermentation early in its life or later in its life to give you 1%, like 1% residual sugar. Everyone's going to notice it. 0.5% residual sugar. Most women will notice it. Most men won't. Women have higher taste bud density and a larger olfactory lobe in their cerebral cortex. So women smell better, both literally and figuratively.
I always say my wife's a better taster than me.
All women are. And that begs the question, why are 3/4 of the world's master sommeliers men? That's because most level 3 sommelier in the court of master sommeliers right now are women. But we expect by about 2035, there will be parity in the world, gender-wise, of master sommeliers. Once some of those men start falling off basically going the way of the dodo, and the women start taking, honestly, the fact that a man is a master sommelier is like a woman being on the front line of an NFL team. Physiologically, they're not suited for it. Physiologically, a man's job in prehistory was to hunt, kill, protect, and a woman's job was to nurture, collect, and ferment, and to determine what food that men threw down on the dusty ground of the cave was safe for the tribe to eat. If the tribe's men were weak, tribe dies by virtue of another tribe coming in and taking it over. If the women can't smell, the tribe dies from toxicity. So there's a very strong evolutionary focus to make men stronger and women to have a better ability to smell. So I think that has something to do with it as well.
Very good. So the initial question of companies that say there's no sugar, I mean, maybe you could speak a little bit to the added, when companies decide to add sugar into their wines versus, and what your thoughts are on that.
Very difficult to make a wine that has residual sugar that won't re-ferment in the bottle and make a huge mess. So in general, wines that have a bit of sweetness do have more process to them. There's a couple ways you can add sugar to a wine. You can stop the fermentation by filtration or by adding sulfur dioxide. Or what we do at the Miller Family Wine Company is we actually take our wines to bone dry, 0% residual. And if we think it needs a little bit of back sweetening, we use what's called moutet. And moutet is actually frozen, sterile, filtered juice from the original grapes we used to make the wine. So instead of adding a bunch of cane sugar or a bunch of beet sugar or a bunch, of high fructose corn syrup, which I'm not a huge fan of, but I don't think it has much more of a glycemic index than sugar. Let's just go ahead and use it's a very expensive and you need to have a lot of freezers at your winery to make sure that when we're going to put a little bit of sugar back into our Pinot Blanc, to take it to 3 grams of residual sugar to give it some breath, but still make it taste bone dry. 3 grams of residual sugar is 0.3%, and 0.3% is almost imperceptible. So for instance, if you had tasted the Pinot Blanc, it's about 2.5 to 3 grams of residual sugar. It's going to taste bone dry, but it's going to also have some breadth and a little bit more, and it's going to also help with the acidity. You don't want the acid to be too.
Yeah, it's going to tone back acidity, kind of fatten it out a little bit, and just.
By moutet, and I think moutet is by far the greatest way to back sweeten a wine. Get it bone dry, and then decide, should it be 2 grams, 3 grams, 4 grams, and make the best wine you can basically in the blending process by using an organic sugar source from the same vines and the same fruit that actually made the wine. It's expensive.
And just a comment on that. The cheaper the wine, the less chance they're doing it that way, and they're doing it the multitude of other ways you could add sugar.
The cheaper the wine, the more the wine's been effed with.
Yeah,
just
100%.
Just how it is.
All right, Tommy says, can you comment on how long a wine lasts in a can? Beer suggested 9 months, but nobody talks about wine.
Yeah, so we are still trying to figure it out. Cans are the highest gaining market share. We saw a 60% increase in can sales just in 2019. So expect to see a lot more cans, especially rosé and white wine. And we also do make a red wine in can, the Smashberry red wine. We've got 16 in cans, and the cans are still drinking extraordinarily well. I'm just starting to understand can technology, and I strongly believe that sort of non-traditional packaging and closures are very important to keep wine moving. And I think cans, obviously, people are feeling really good about cans. You buy a $5, $6 can of wine, and it's a full half bottle. Take it to the beach. Everything looks a little bit different. It's a great portable way to drink wine. It's also an incredibly cheap way to transport wine. The width and you might not.
That's great too.
Yeah, a Coke cans used to weigh like 2 or 3 grams, and now they're down to like 1/10 of a gram. So I mean, the amount of material actually used in the production of a can is incredibly minimal. It's 100% recyclable. So I think it's can. If I was buying canned wine though, I wouldn't expect to lay the cans down in my cellar.
Yeah, it's not meant for that.
Why not? I got 16 cans in my sample room right now. I'm going to put 2 in my cellar and try them 10 years from now. It's a brave new world, and we don't know. The real answer is I have no clue.
We don't know yet.
And I will know when I lay down some cans and find out, will they age? Will they produce secondary and tertiary aromas? Will they be leathery and complex and show all the peppery and earthy aromas that we would get from a bottle? Chemically, I don't know anything in organic chemistry that would say no. The wines are about the same amount of dissolved oxygen that you would expect under a screw cap. So I would say in the end, I would expect the ageability to be perfectly commensurate with a screw cap closure.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say with the screw cap, because you're losing the oxygenation from the cork that does not exist. James, go on.
No, I was just going to say most studies have shown that there is no ingress of atmosphere between outside the bottle and inside the bottle. All the gas exchange happens with whatever exists between the walls of the cork.
Interesting.
So if there's oxygen in the cork, you'll get a higher dissolved oxygen. If there's no oxygen in the cork, it generally is a hermetic seal.
Interesting. So you're saying that theoretically, well, I guess you're saying there's oxygen in the cork already. So, and every cork's a snowflake, so that's going to lead to inconsistency. Interesting.
Okay.
All right. So James asks, how do you feel about hybrid wine?
I love hybrid wines. And I've spent time at Cornell. I've spent time at University of Minnesota. I've gone, between Ithaca all the way up to Geneva to the experimental station at Cornell. It's easy for us to say, why doesn't everyone just grow vinifera wines, until you see some vineyards in Kansas City or, in Lawrence, Kansas, until you go out to the East Coast, until you taste a Norton from Minnesota, from Missouri. Can you grow good Cabernet Franc and Viognier in Virginia? Yes, you can, but there's plenty of places in the United States that really need these hybrid wines. And these hybrid wines are making great. I just had a Marquette from northern Minnesota. I've also had one from North Dakota, Marquette Blanc, which was beautiful and gorgeous. And you just couldn't keep a vinifera vine alive in the northern tier because of their winters. So I think we need to stop thinking about wine has to taste like California, Oregon, Washington to be high quality, and start thinking of ourselves as American wine patriots, and taking ourselves out of our own comfort zone and experimenting and trying some wines from Maryland, wines from Virginia, wines from Missouri, wines from Idaho, which is making some amazing wines right now. Let's break out of this idea and say, damn it, I'm an American wine patriot. And the same way that a French person is born with the umbilically provided knowledge that just French people just automatically are born with the knowledge of every wine in France, like British people are automatically born with every Beatles lyric in their head. What are Americans born with? I would love to get Americans to understand how wines not only represent a European style, but there are also some American hybrids that are making excellent wines. So I think it's our responsibility as Americans to experiment with American wines and say, damn it, I'm going to buy 5 bottles of wine this year from regions outside of that which I've tasted. I'm going to drink a New Mexico wine. I'm going to drink an Idaho wine. I'm going to drink a Virginia wine. I'm going to drink a Minnesota wine. Let's play around with flavor, find out what we love. You might find something you really, really enjoy.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, my whole thing with some of those regions too is that if they get the support, then they get more winemakers, more knowledge, more education. They're all talking to each other, figuring out what varietals are working, what techniques in the vineyard are working. So a lot of the thing I think that holds back some of those smaller regions is just the fact that, it's just not grown to a size yet where people can lean on each other for knowledge and assistance.
And they have to, and this is what Virginia did right. Virginia started, when they started making wines, they would price their wines at $40 to $55, and no one would buy them except the politicians in the DC and Beltway area. And they would all pour all these expensive Virginia wines at all of their local political things. So they were selling some wines, but they weren't getting a lot of pull through. Then Virginia, about 7 to 10 years ago, pulled back and invested in value. What do I mean by that? They started pricing their wines at $18 to $25, and everyone started buying them because they're worth $18 to $25 in the global wine market. So the issue is in regions that are developing, you can't charge people how much it costs to produce your wine because it's not worth it. In the global wine market, when you can buy delicious California wine from Lodi for $10, why do I want to buy an uninteresting wine for $45 from the Monticello in Virginia? Virginia is doing an excellent job of investing in value, and I think that's really important. So I think, the American wine market is moving a little bit, just in little tiny incremental moments, away from the West Coast and maybe to other areas that are producing really good wines. And if you've never had a delicious Norton from Stone Creek or Victor Hugo in Missouri, you should really try those wines because they really do represent areas in the United States that really are producing great wines that don't get enough attention and credit.
Yeah, and if you look at the map we had earlier with the the lines of latitude, there's a huge section on the east coast of the United States, and if you couple that with maybe you get the moderating effect of some of the ocean there, I feel like you should have it should look like California essentially.
The problem with the East Coast is the beaches in the summer are not cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
get enough breeze.
The Atlantic gets hot and the Pacific stays cold. Even the hottest part of the Pacific Ocean on the California coast never goes over 59 degrees.
Interesting.
So it moderates our climate, and I think one reason, would I rather be at the water than in the middle of in Manhattan in summer? Probably, but the temperature is not going to really be different as opposed to Pasadena versus, Santa Monica, which is going to be a 20-degree difference on a regular summer day.
Interesting. All right. So Valerie says, how long is too long to keep a Brunello or Pinot Noir? I have a couple good Brunellos, 20 plus years, hoping they are still good. I know for a fact that you can ask 10 different winos this and you'll get 10 different answers. But I would say, depending on the year, the Brunello is probably about ready right now. And then Pinot Noir, that's so a lot of factors on that. But I would say you would probably, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. What is your answer on it?
Every wine, it depends also. My wife and I love wines that are just dead, wines that have no fruit, nothing left except just earth and funk. That earth and that funk speaks to me of the place where it was grown, devoid of the fruit that has been, it's sort of like beauty in a woman or beauty in a man, handsomeness in a man. If you're really, really pretty or really, really handsome, you really don't need to be good at life. Right? I mean, it's like what Chris Rock said, an ugly woman understands what it's like to be a man. You got to work, which is a horrible thing to say, right? But there's some truth to it. The more beautiful you are, the less you have to work. And the more fruity a wine is, the less it has to work. So if a wine can be devoid of fruit and still show me something and some complexity, that's what I love. It's almost forensic in that sense. So a 20-year-old Brunello from a good producer is going to be drinking beautifully, unless what you love about wine is the fresh primary fruit character, blackberry, blueberry, strawberry, cherry, all the wonderful flavors that come out of a wine. When those wine, so this is fruit and this is complexity. Okay. So fruit sublimates and complexity emerges. The question is complexity inherent in wine, or does it only emerge because of the baby fat falls off the wine and the mature face emerges? What I always like to say is drink them like you like to date them. If you want something really pretty, drink them young. If you want to have a conversation, wait. If you date an 18-year-old, they're going to look great in a bathing suit, male or female. I'm not being gender specific, but young people are prettier and old people are more interesting. And, as we age, I'm 51, I have compensated for my lack of youth with character and complexity. So I might not be nearly as interesting to look at, but now I have more to say. And that's exactly what we can expect of wine. If you want to date someone young, expect them to look great in a bathing suit, but have no conversation at table. 18-year-olds suck at talking philosophy until 3 a.m. But get someone with a master's degree in their late 20s, early 30s, all of a sudden their brain starts to develop. They have much more to say. That's what I say about wine. The question is, what do you want? There's no value judgment here. If you want a bright, fruity, young wine, there's lots of wine in California that'll appeal to you. If you want wines that are complex, earthy, and have all these secondary and tertiary characteristics, we have to do something that's completely un-American, and that's to be patient. 20-year Brunello, I would say great. 20-year Pinot Noir, it better be Premier Grand
Good.
From Burgundy. Last thing I'll say about that is I was gifted a 1969 bottle of Louis Latour Vosne Romani for my 50th birthday. It was my birth year wine, 1969. This was a wine that cost maybe $7 at release, which was really expensive back then, right?
Yeah, as I say, hypothetically.
Belage, not Premier Cru, not Grand Cru, 50 years old. Not only was that wine spectacularly delicious and interesting when it was first opened, I gassed it and brought it to my wine birthday party the next night and poured it for everyone who was there too. It was alive on the second night. So place matters, terroir matters. If a region is world famous, there's no other place in the world like Vosne Romani. You could argue Chambertin, which was Napoleon's favorite, and Vosne Romani, which is considered the greatest moment, the greatest place in the world to grow Pinot Noir today, in the middle of Burgundy. So it really depends on where the wine is from, the producer, and the track record.
Yeah, and you kind of said, besides all that other stuff, you said what I thought you were going to say, which is it really depends how you like to have your wine. When you're young, we all like filet mignon. When you get older, you tend to go lean towards ribeyes and, the more complex cuts and the fat. So it's just how you like your wine. I tend to lean on your side where I love those tertiary flavors. But you have to lay down the wine, or you have to pay money for wine that somebody laid down for you. So it's all about that balance. Wes, Carrie, obviously I know Carrie, one of my fans, and she doesn't know you, so give a quick scoop on your background and how you got into wine.
Real quick, I retired from a very early career in public education. I was a high school English teacher. Kids drove me to drink. I went pro. Well, actually, I went to Minnesota, taught a year at community college, and then found out that my parents had bought a piece of property near Lompoc across from the Huber and Babcock vineyards in what would become the Santa Rita Hills. Drove back from Minnesota straight into California and basically planted myself at my family property for 20 years, where I became the vineyard manager and the winemaker for Clos Pepe and Clos Pepe Vineyards. Went to University of California, Davis to learn as much as I could without getting a degree. A lot of courses there. Worked with Brian Babcock at Babcock Vineyards in 1996 as my first commercial winemaking position. And then in 1997, I started 1996. I was the vineyard manager at Clos Pepe. 97, I wrote the petition that established the Santa Rita Hills American Viticultural Area, which was approved in 2001. I managed Clos Pepe and made the wine there from 1996 until 2014. 2014, my wife and I decided it was time to leave the family business. We moved to Orcutt, Santa Maria, California, started working for the Miller family. And now I've been the winemaker for J. Wilkes Wines and the brand ambassador for the Miller Family Wine Company since 2015. Quick and dirty summation.
Beautiful. Dominic asked Vince, are you heading back to Europe for season 3 of your show? And can you tag along? Yeah, if I need help. You wanna run my camera? I need something as much help as I can always on the road. We run with such a lean crew, so I'm always looking for help if you want to tag along.
I don't know.
That being said,
I don't know why you work with a lean crew, because when you came up and did the production for that first video, I've never seen a wine show run with such a pro LA crew. They're pro, but there's only 3 of us, right? I mean, people I think a lot of times they think it's a much larger production than it is. I've had some fans now that I've done in season 2, they met me on set and they're like, oh, it's just you and these 2 or 3 guys. And I'm like, yeah, we try and keep it as lean as possible, but they do an amazing job. I'm super lucky. That being said, are you headed back to Europe? Yes, I'm headed not only Europe, but I'm looking at the rest of the world. The goal has always been to expand outside of America. I do have some American episodes that I'm talking to. I can tell you for sure Bordeaux is going to happen, which is tremendous, and I'm very, very excited for. And then I have a lot of other places that I'm talking to, but I don't want to say names because nothing's official yet. Everything's got put on hold with everything that's happening. But I'm very confident that we'll be doing much, much more abroad episodes, which is super exciting. Vince, what's your favorite wine cocktail? French 75, without question. It is gin, lemon juice, sugar, and usually champagne or Prosecco. And it's just so good. It's a perfect brunch cocktail too. I've actually been putting cocktails on my Instagram feed, and I did a French 75 one, so I'm going to post that within the next couple of weeks if you're interested. V is for Vino on Instagram for a plug. Thoughts on cement? James says, thoughts on cement fermentation containers. Saw it in a number of wineries in the last year. I'll go ahead and say it's not really concrete because all concrete is now sealed with epoxy. So you might as well just have an epoxy fermenter. If you want to use real concrete, the problem is the tartaric acid starts wearing away on the concrete. But I love the idea of limestone and all the ingredients in concrete influencing the flavor profile. The modern concrete tank is not concrete; it's epoxy lined. So you might as well be using food grade plastic. So that's an unpopular opinion. I'm certainly not selling anyone on concrete fermenters. Now, if you're using a concrete egg, if you're using Kvevery, if you're using actual non-lined, ceramic, that's one thing. But most concrete vessels right now are lined to the point where I don't really see the point.
There you go.
That's the I wish it was a sexier answer.
I feel like I did one a couple weeks ago and I had to give some unsexy answers and stuff because you don't want anybody, you don't want to turn people off from ideas or anything like that, but you have to be honest with what you think. Christy, go on. Christy wants to know, what are we both drinking right now? Wes, what are you drinking?
I'm drinking the 2018 Pinot Noir J. Wilkes. I opened it over a week ago and I sealed it with a repour. Have you tried these repours? Vince?
No, okay. So I was going to ask you about that because I saw it, and so I have a Coravin. That's my kind of preservation system. What's with the repours?
The Repour is basically a sort of a Coravin without sort of refills. So what it is it basically has a proprietary material within that you peel a little bit of a label off of it, and it becomes active. You put it in a bottle, and it starts absorbing oxygen, and it'll absorb oxygen in a bottle, one bottle up to a month, multiple bottles a couple weeks. And for instance, I opened this bottle of 2018 9 days ago, and it is drinking like it was been opened and decanted like for an hour and a half. Perfectly juicy and delicious. Cool climate, lot of primary fruit, some nice baking spice, and 2018 J. Wilkes Pinot Noir. I will give one quick plug that if you go to the MillerFamilyWines.com, you can use the promo code DD50, which is day drinking 50. You can get 20% off 6-pack or more of J. Wilkes. You can get 25% off a case or more. And the promo code will get you a $10 flat rate shipping per case. So we do have some really cool specials right now. You can also look at, if I was going to buy a case of wine for the summer, I would go ahead and go in and look at the Ballard Lane, or excuse me, the Smashberry Rosé, which is this wine right here. We had great plans to launch this in person all over the United States. In fact, I was already, had my tickets to go to like 9 different states to launch this wine. If you know anything about rosé, you got to get it in like March and April to get it in. And unfortunately, March and April were a little tough. So we've changed the rosé. It's supposed to, it's a $14.99 rosé on the shelf. We're selling it at the Miller Family Wine Company right now for $7.50. 50% off to get people drinking. It's a 90-point rosé. Got 90 points in the enthusiast, 90 points in the tasting panel. It's a bitchin' Grenache rosé with a little bit of Syrah and a tiny, tiny bit of Chardonnay, just for a little bit of aromatic breadth. But if you love a good dry rosé and you're looking for something under $10, that Smashberry rosé is spectacular.
Nice. Where are the grapes from?
French Camp Vineyard in Paso Robles Highlands District, our estate vineyard. We grow the grapes ourselves. We're
nice.
2,400. The Miller Family Wine Company is 2,400 acres under vine, Bien Nacido, Solomon Hills, French Camp. And we've been farming fruit on the central coast of California from Ventura to Paso Robles since 1871.
Very good. And what I'm drinking, by the way, Wes, I picked this bottle today because I'm hoping you can tell me what I'm drinking. Is it reversed? You probably can't read it. Yeah, but the St. Magdalener, and then it says Rondell. I don't know what it is. And I got it typically because I didn't know what it was. And it's got like a Beaujolais-esque kind of fruit, fruit and pepper thing going on, which I really like, but I didn't know what it was, and it's delicious. It's Northern Italy.
I'm not an advanced sommelier. I'm a almost level 3 WSET, which means I know how to educate about wine. That is one. And how interesting that I've been in professional wine now for 20, 25 years, and I have no freaking clue what you're drinking.
Yeah, so, and that was me, and that's why I bought it. I was like, I have no idea what this is, so it's probably good that I try it.
Google is wondering why they're getting 4 simultaneously asks on what the hell you're drinking.
Very cool.
One thing I have been drinking too, I just have to give a quick plug, is
I love Fortaleza.
Dude, this silver, my friend in Minnesota actually sent me a bottle.
Fortaleza, it's my favorite tequila.
It is, the Fortaleza silver is like an agave razor. It's like, it is such a beautiful, have you had Casa Dragones?
I got a bottle right here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a miracle of fermentation. It's a miracle of distillation. It's the cleanest white liquor distillation I've ever tasted. I love it for its pureness, but as far as the character of Jalisco, the flavor of a Tejon produced proper ancient style of tequila, I just think Fortaleza and Guillermo Salsa is the most interesting man in the world.
Yeah, I have a preference for the Reposado, but I love them all. They're super delicious.
There's no
very good. I'm looking to see if there's any other questions. Thank you everybody who tuned in. This has gone long, and I'm 100% okay with it as long as people are still watching. I'm totally enjoying this so much and getting to chat with Wes and see all your comments.
Time flies with enough liquor.
Yeah, definitely. Wes, what are your thoughts on the use of flex tanks that allow micro-oxygenation and oak adjuncts as opposed to barrels are these being used in California?
Flex tanks are as good as concrete as far as I'm concerned. It's a horribly non-popular opinion, but I'm being completely honest with you that the idea of having a concrete tank in your winery as opposed to a flex tank, which is a tank you can pick up with a forklift. It's food grade plastic. What's the difference between an epoxy lining and a food grade plastic tank? I don't know. It does allow a little bit of oxidation, or a little bit of micro ox to increase the aromatics of a wine. And if you use oak adjuncts, and to be perfectly frank, there's certainly wines within the price points within the Miller Family Wine Company where we do use stainless steel tanks and oak adjuncts, because the wines are selling for $7 to $8 a glass, and we can't put them all in barrels. Barrels are $1,000 a piece. So we approximate the oxygen ingress within the tank with the same amount of oak influence. One thing I like about the way we use oak at the Miller Family Wine Company is we don't use chips, and we generally don't use tea. A lot of larger wine companies now are not even using chips or staves in a tank to give oak influence. They're using oak tea, which is liquid oak that you pour into the tank right before you blend it up, taste it, and bottle it. I don't know. I find that just a slight bit profane, even though it might make a wine that's quite drinkable for a very low price. But I would say I would rather use the larger pieces of oak. The larger piece of oak you can use, the better, either a spiral or a full-size stave submerged in the tank so it has access to absorb the flavor. The one thing it doesn't do in a tank is oxygen. When wine's in a barrel, it's basically breathing through the pores of the wood. Certainly barrel aging is superior to produce the best wines in the world. But if you're talking Pinot Blanc, Viognier, Sauvignon Blanc, I will go stainless steel all day. And I'm incredibly proud to say that the Pinot Blanc and the Viognier that we make under the J. Wilkes label has never seen a lick of oak in its entire life. It's a wine completely and totally focused on the flavors of the fermentation as they emerge.
I'm so excited for that Viognier. I haven't tried it. And when I saw that you have it, because I knew you were going to do it right, because I feel 100% the same. When I see oak or taste oak on Viognier, I want to cry a little bit. And so I knew you were going to make it like that, which is tremendous.
Stainless steel all day long and zero mallow. So it's bright, it's crisp, and it's just not, I hate the fact that we're taking all these beautiful aromatic whites and trying to turn them into Chardonnay just because we think Chardonnay is the sort of, the white wine everyone wants to drink. I think there's so many different styles that we can make out there, and opening up those styles, excuse me, is very important to me as a winemaker.
Very good. Anything else before we I think we got everybody's questions. I know there's a lot of comments, and I obviously thank you, everybody who tuned in. This has been so much fun. This is what, you do this every day, but for me, it reminded me of when I used to be a musician, and the day of a show, I used to get very excited, and because I knew that I was going to be quote unquote, seeing everybody and engaging and performing. And so this is very similar to that. So it's been fun for me.
That's exactly right, in the sense that I always, you always have that moment of knowing that you're going to go on camera and share your thoughts with a lot of people in the world. And it can be challenging, but in a world where we're all sort of stuck listening to each other in little boxes on our computers, how important is it that we do find an opportunity to connect, that we encourage people to be safe, that we encourage people to stay on top of stuff, to encourage people to find their neighbors and their family and their people in their social circles that need help, and that we can reach out to them. I definitely recommend, in the end, that wine is important, but it's useless in the sense that if it doesn't bring us together, I just don't want to play. So I hope that wine works for you the same way as it works for me, which is basically as an investment to keep the people in my life and in my house at table talking and interacting with each other for an extra hour a day. And if there's ever been a time in Western culture that we need connection, I think it's now. So I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone in your household for loaning me you for a couple hours so we can do this. I want to thank everyone who tuned in. And I just want to close the same way that I always do by saying, if you can't be with the one you love, if you can't be with the wine you love the wine and one you're with, because it's time to do that. And we'll be with each other again soon. So I am actually planning a big offline when we all get through this. I'm going to invite all the people that come onto the show on a regular basis. We're going to all go to Vegas and we're going to we are throwing down, and I'm going to maybe be a little, anyone who's known me in this industry knows that I'm always drinking, but they've never seen me thoroughly intoxicated. I might ruin that rule that when I go to Vegas, I will just, like Oscar Wilde said, all things in moderation, including moderation. And I might just throw moderation to the wind to show that maybe Oscar Wilde was right. So what a wonderful time to be together. And thank you so much for your time and your expertise and your excellent questions, as well as your passion for this subject. I love the fact that you're in this to learn and you're sharing the moments of these learning with people that are also learning. I think you've cashed in on an audience that a lot of people missed out on. So congratulations, and I look forward to another season of V is for Vino.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's why I started it. I started it because I realized I knew nothing. I knew something and I knew nothing. And I'm sure at even with all your experience, you still feel, like you said, we found a wine tonight that you didn't know. We know nothing. And so it's a topic that we can just keep diving in. So thank you so much for having me. Always amazing to talk to you.
Thank you. To admit ignorance is wise. He who says he knows does not know. He who admit ignorance is wise. And I think that's that was Confucius, who also said, what was it? Something. Well, regardless, look at Confucius. I was going to say his quote about the idea between a flick of a hand and a cannonball being very important when you realize the most important moment to realize the difference between a flick and a cannonball is when a mosquito lands on your testicles.
With that, let's get out of here. Thank you so much, man.
It was a great night. I apologize that I had to end that way, but we'll have another time and let's do this again soon.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Cheers, everybody.